Okay. We are.
It's pretty close.
Let's see. Chair, we are ready to begin whenever you are.
All right, let's go. I forget if I start with the gavel, but I'm going to anyway. Welcome, everyone. The Clackamas Community College Budget Committee meeting will now come to order. One more. Today is Wednesday, May 14th, around 6 p.m. Tonight's meeting will be a presentation of the proposed budget and background information from the college administration. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation to budget committee members. We will not be taking any comments and questions from the audience at this time. Our next meeting is scheduled for May 21st, 2025 at 6 p.m. This meeting will include time for further questions from the budget committee and time for the budget committee to listen to public comments. At the May 21st meeting, the budget committee will vote to approve the proposed budget. The budget will be adopted by the CCC Board of Education at its June 25th meeting. Prior to that adoption, a public hearing will be held, which is a time for any interested parties to comment on the approved budget. For the roll call tonight, I will ask each member to go around and state their first and last name for the record. You do not need to provide the district number you represent. Let's begin with the furthest person to my right.
Wade Hathorn.
Wade Byers.
Jane Reed.
David Cheatzazon.
Michael Morrow.
Joe Crenshaw.
Rob Wheeler.
Christine Didway.
And for the virtual members,
Irene Konev.
Andre Chernyshov.
our first item of business is to approve the minutes of the last meeting, which was held on May 15th, 2024, which was in the agenda packet. Is there any discussions or questions regarding the meeting minutes?
I move to approve the meeting minutes.
We have a motion. Oh, and we need a second.
Second. Yeah, there you go.
Ooh, Wade B for the win. We have a motion and a second to approve the minutes of the May 15th, 2024 Budget Committee meeting. We will vote by acclamation. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. Are there any abstentions? Motion passes. Now we need to determine who will chair the budget committee for this year. Would anyone like to make a nomination? I'm also happy to run it back if no one has any, if anyone.
I mean, I would nominate David Chitzazan since he's sitting there and running the mic.
Second.
Are there any other nominations? All right.
And I'm
Right.
sorry, I know I slaughtered your last name. Please correct me.
Katie, you want to do it?
Chitzazan.
Yeah. Think pizza's on the oven, pizza's on. We have a nomination and a second to elect David Cheatzazon as chair for the budget committee for the 25-26 budget. Let's vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say no. Are there any abstentions? David Cheatzazon has been elected chair. Okay. We are now on section 5, the role of the budget committee. Vice President Jeff Schaefer is going to talk about the role of the budget committee.
We should note that, Kathy
That I'm
Hansen
here. No.
hasn't-
Oh, I'm so sorry. Would the furthest right on the table please state their name
For the record.
for the
Yes.
record?
Thank you. I will do that. I'm Kathy Heisey. I'm a member of the board. Apologies for being late. I represent Zone 1.
All right. Thank you. Vice President Jeff Schaefer, and I will get us started, make sure we're working here. All right. I'll just kick us off quickly with an agenda of the presentation for everybody. We're welcome again to the 2025-26 Budget Committee. So thank you all for coming. I first wanted to invite everybody. We're going to talk about the Budget Committee and its role. President Cook will give the president's message. Dean Christy Owen will provide a financial summary for the proposed budget. I'll provide the forecast and our process that we use this year. And we'll walk through the budget reductions, and then President Cook will come in and talk about the next steps for us here. And then we'll have some Q&A. So starting with our budget committee, the budget committees are legally required by the state of Oregon. Oregon provides statute for ORS budget law. They ensure to provide transparency for the public, involvement in our process of our budget. They represent the budget committee members represent the larger community members in the district. Since we couldn't necessarily engage back and forth with all 400,000 members of the district on our budget, you all are really that public presence for our district around here on our public budget process. The budget committees are tasked with legally needing to approve our proposed budgets and then levy our property taxes in order for us to continue operations into next year. Thank you. You went back. Yeah, there we go. We got it.
By the way, I love looking out the window, but maybe I shouldn't. Maybe it's not why you not sat me on the side of the room. I'll be distracted by the.
Distracting and beautiful outside. Thank you. So our membership is made up of traditionally made up of our 7 public community members and 7 Board of Education members from our 7 geographical regions around the district. The college provides support for follow-up questions to our budget committee on any questions that may come up from our proposed budget. And we can traditionally we'll meet 2 times. This is meeting number 1. The second meeting is really the meeting where we have any discussion, any public comment, and end up leading to a vote. So that's really what we do as our budget committee. And I think with that, I will transition us over to President Cook to talk through the president's message.
Thanks, Jeff. And you're gonna run the slideshow. So thank you very much. Thank you again, budget committee members, board members, for being here tonight. So as was said, this is our first open conversation on the proposed budget for fiscal year 2025-26. This is our opportunity, and we've got quite a bit of content tonight to have conversation, give questions on all of this, and then also talk about future planning efforts. And this is our policy for our use of resources. So tonight we have obviously people in person and then virtually on YouTube that have the opportunity to watch the budget committee, and then it's also recorded for people that are not able to be here and want to watch at a later time. Any public comment and decisions will happen next week at May 21st. So what you have in front of you, the proposed budget reflects the board guidance and policies from our meetings last spring, and I believe you were all here for those, and then more recently in the fall of 2024. What we're directed and have been directed to do is to really prioritize our core services in support of the college strategic plan. So as we looked at the budget, we were definitely looking at what's core, what's central to our mission. We got a clear message that we can no longer rely on our one-time funds to balance our general operations. We've been sort of kicking the can for several years with federal money, and that money is running out this next year. And so we got the message loud and clear that we needed to take care of that. And then our goal is to reduce, if not eliminate, the structural deficit in the forecast. So that I remember distinctly the last actually couple budget rounds is that the budget committee and the board would like to see the deficit resolved and have a balanced budget moving forward. So I think you'll be happy to see the results of that as we move forward. So I will say, in order to reduce that deficit, it's about a $3 million deficit that we have right now. And so, it's impossible to have zero impact when you're reducing $3 million, which is roughly 4% of our operating budget. So you will see, as we talk about some of the actual plans and ways to do that, that there are some impacts, but our goal was to reduce impacts as much as possible on people. So hopefully you'll see that as well. We wanted to make sure that people understood and assessed our trade-offs beyond just finances. When you're eliminating something, obviously, what's the impact to the community? What's the impact to students and the services beyond just money? So you will also see a prioritized list of reductions that resulted in some short but focused list of hard choices to reduce our ongoing expenses. We work on this pretty much all year, quite frankly, and it's not an easy task. It's not an easy process. There's a number of people across the college that really get involved. But again, making some really, I think, hard but necessary choices. And then I will say the decisions that we have before you to balance our budget are reflective of what we know today. And I probably don't need to tell you that there's a lot of things in flux. Just today, the state revenue forecast came out, which is, the big one we wait for to see what our state funding might end up being. And it came out $500 million shorter than anticipated. So we are already assuming that we're not going to get to the $920 million statewide fund for community colleges that we were working so hard to get. It's still possible, but that the news we got today wasn't as positive as we would have liked. And then there are a number of uncertainties about federal impacts. If you've heard any of my discussions over the last several months, the community college, Clackamas Community College, does not rely a lot on federal funding, but where this may impact us significantly is the pass-through dollars that come from the federal government to the state. And so depending on what happens federally over this next year or years, there could be additional impacts that we just aren't aware of at this time. So as I mentioned, we've I guess, have been fortunate to have a number of federal one-time funds since the pandemic that have really carried us through as enrollments dropped and as we've been kind of coming back, and our enrollments have been coming back strong. But we've been relying on since the pandemic these one-time funds to really balance our budget, and they've in many ways masked this deficit as we've been able to cover that. Well, the last of that money is running out this next year in 2026. So, we've known that, we've planned for it, and our goal is to make sure that we had the least impact using those funds, and then making sure that we have that balanced budget. Of course, it's important to note, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done around our strategic enrollment management plan. And enrollment, just about every quarter has bounced back around 9–10%. It's been really healthy. But with increased inflation costs, extensive PERS costs, it's just not enough. Our enrollment's not enough to cover this. And so that's why also you're going to see the reductions that you're seeing today. Additionally, when we thought about making reductions this year, in the past, we've done things where we've had asked for percentage cuts across departments and units. Some people call that thinning the soup, or, salami cuts, and the rest. We really tried to avoid that. We wanted to be strategic and really thoughtful about where we're going to make these reductions, and not just do this sort of across the board model, which, again, I think was the right thing to do. It caused it to take a little bit longer, and it's a little bit more work, but I think ultimately the result is better. And as I just mentioned, we made the decision, in the past, we've always kind of built budgets on hopes that state funding would come through at a predetermined amount, or what we hoped it would be. And it's always a timing challenge, because we don't really know usually until end of May, early June, what that state funding will be. We made the decision early on this year that we're not going to build our budget on hopes and dreams and waiting. We wanted to do a budget that we thought was realistic, that if for some reason the state funding came in higher than what we were budgeting, which was the CSL, we would consider that a win and look for ways to really allocate that funding, but we weren't going to build a budget hoping that would happen. And then we spent quite a bit of time really looking and collecting data, analyzing, addressing impacts, I would just give some thanks right now really quickly to our budget office, to Christy and to Lisa Shaw, our new budget analyst, who really did quite a bit of work gathering data, and really when we'd ask questions about, what does this mean? What's the impact? Were really responsive. And then, we've got some of our deans here and others that really did quite a bit of work too, to really bring forward out of the box thinking and some different ideas that we did and when we worked for those. So I think you'll see evidence of all of that today. So, as I said, it was really important to us that we preserve our academic core services. We ask this question a lot. If you think about a bullseye and our core and our missions in the middle, what are we funding, and what sorts of things are sort of outside of that core that we may need to address. So we're not eliminating any academic or departments or programs. There are some classes that we're eliminating that you'll see, and some impacts that we have on that, but we have not eliminated any departments or programs. So all the degrees and certificates we offered this year will be offered in next year, and I want to be really clear about that. And then even when you talk about what we've eliminated, this is kind of a fun fact for you. When anyone asks you how many classes we offer a year, it's right around 5,000 classes we offer every year here, quite a bit. And we're looking to cut about 98 of those 5,000. So it's around 2% of sections or classes that we're actually reducing when we do that too. And then our organizational operations, continuing our basic business functions, continuing at current service levels. So when we say that, it's our enrollment services, it's our IT support, it's our financial aid, payroll, all of those kind of business programs that will continue to operate at current service levels. And then we also it's important that we tried to keep impacts to student services minimal. We know that our students have a lot of needs, and we try to reduce barriers there. So we were really cognizant to really try to lessen the impact on our student services. And what you'll see is that we didn't quite finish the job. And I'll just be upfront about that because you'll see it later. We had a target of 3 million. And right now, as of if this is all approved and we start this July 1, this new budget, we've got about $2.35 million of it identified that will start right then. So we still have about $650,000 that we need to identify this next year. And you'll hear this term glide path a number of times, where we've identified some business services and some other processes here at the college that we want to spend some more time analyzing, really looking at the impacts and seeing where we can make some changes without impact. I'll be really frank, and folks in here know this. When the recommendation came back to me at 2.35, I said, we were told 3. We need to get 3. And they said, we can get to 3, but it's going to mean that we have to lay people off. And it's going to mean we might have to make some system changes that we haven't fully analyzed, and we don't know what the outcomes for those will be yet. So we're very confident, I'm very confident that we'll get that extra 650 this next year, but this gives us the time to really continue with our position freezes and really analyze again where we can move some things, where we can cut back some more and not impact actual staff, existing staff now. So I know there'll probably be some questions about that, and we'll get into that glide path a little bit more specifically, but I wanted to be really upfront as we talk about, this task ahead of us still to get to the 3 million. And I think actually I jumped ahead of myself. So yeah, this was the reason why if we did that right now, we would be talking about layoffs. I'm really proud of the fact that in general, we did not lay off anybody. We had a number of frozen positions. We were able to move some things around. We had one administrative position that had been cut as part of this process. Beyond that, we did not have to lay off any of our existing employees. And so that was in and of itself quite a feat. Yeah, and so I don't think there's anything else I want to add on this slide I didn't say. And then finally, before I switch it back to Christy and Jeff to really get into some details about this, I think what's exciting about coming forward with a balanced budget is that we can start really transitioning our mindset. we've been operating here with a deficit mindset for so many years. It really is, I'm sure all of you know about growth mindsets and deficit mindsets. There's just this really almost kind of thinking here about, we're always working with less, or we don't have enough, And so to be in a position where we're balanced and we can start looking at new funding or additional funding or how to invest in different ways really gives us the opportunity to create this growth mindset, I think, for the college. And I'm pretty excited about that. I'm pretty excited, that possibilities this next year to really start thinking about where do we need to invest in our programs? Where do we really need to look and to grow? So, that's really an optimistic viewpoint, which I'm known for being very optimistic, and I'm again pretty excited about this. But it lets us really prioritize these dollars without worrying about this deficit that's sort of been hanging over our heads for quite some time. And then I'll finally add that, we have some capacity added with our recently approved capital bond. I know many of you again helped us with that. And it's pretty exciting, the projects we get to do with it. And, we've even more recently, we're selling that bond. We actually got additional funds that we get to now apply toward that. So there's some exciting things happening in addition to getting this balanced budget that I think will move the college forward in some really positive ways. So I will come back towards the end and talk a little bit about sort of next steps and how we're gonna finish off that 3 million. But in the meantime, I'm gonna pass it back to Jeff and to Christy, who are gonna give you some detail and the rest on that.
Yep. Thank you, President Cook. Good evening. My name is Christy Owen, the Dean of Business Services, and I am here to provide summary financial information as presented in the all funds proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26. So there are 22 legally defined funds in the proposed budget book. As you saw, it was 150 pages, riveting read. We're going to have some of the highlights of the financial summaries here. It includes a new capital fund for the financial management of the recently voter-approved general obligation bond. So the year-over-year increase in the proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26 is largely attributed to the addition of this new capital fund. In fact, of the 284.4 million, 45%, or nearly half of the funds alone, are a direct tie to the voter-approved bond project. It's important to state that this all-fund budget does include all contingency, reserve, and ending fund balance accounts, so it's the total package. There are also incremental increases in non-general funds as well, where enrollment is a part of the change in revenues and expenses. For example, the budget for expense for financial aid is also included as part of that total appropriation, even though this fund largely represents a pass-through of direct aid to students. So you don't necessarily have like a fund balance in financial aid that rolls over year to year because it is a pass-through of direct aid. Finally, it's important to notate that the proposed budget maintains transfers between funding categories to ensure that future equipment replacement, technology replacements, insurance requirements, and future retirement reserve obligations are all met. So all of our goals to preserve the assets that we have and the things that we own are not reductions that would kick a can on a future asset or a future liability. Next slide, please. Some of these charts you may have seen in the proposed budget book. We're going to go through them a little bit here. This chart provides a summary of the primary fund operating revenues by fund category in fiscal year 25-26. The information shows the sources of annual operating revenues and does not include the beginning fund balances. Operating revenues are the annual funds from dedicated sources coming into the college. These sources may be restricted for an intended use, such as a grant, or may be unrestricted, such as general fund, which supports our operations. Next slide. This chart provides the summary of the operating expenses. So the first slide had our revenues by fund type, and now this slide shows our expenses by fund category. Operating expenses also do not include contingencies, reserves, or ending fund balance. It's what we need to program or to resource out for our daily operations. The general fund is primarily operating fund for the college, and personal services, as you can see with the blue bar on the chart on the left, accounts for the salaries, wages, healthcare benefits, and wage-driven benefits such as PERS, and it's approximately 85% of the general fund. This has been consistent year over year for the last few years at the college. Special revenue and funds, those include the course fees and also our dedicated grants and financial aid funds. These funds are a dedicated resource and a purpose expense. Now we see our new capital projects fund. Looking at this presentation last year, that bar would have been significantly reduced. The capital fund reflects those planned expenses for some of the first wave of bond projects. And these are the restricted bond projects per the voter approved measure. We have a smallest fund category for proprietary funds. This is where dedicated program revenues support operations. The college has 3 proprietary funds for the bookstore operations, the Environmental Learning Center, and our customized training and development services. Our final fund category is debt service, and that's where our payments for principal and interest for outstanding debt issued by the college are recorded. This slide features our school colors prominently. And it also shows 10 years of history of the general fund operating revenues. As you can see, we have primary ongoing resources categorized in 3 large groups that are about 98% of what comes in and supports college operations: property taxes, state resource allocations, and tuition. Less than 2% of the resources come in from outside of these 3 categories. As enrollment has increased, we are seeing tuition become more of a proportion of the operations. So as you look pre-pandemic, the gray bars were slightly closer in size to the red and the blue. When tuition dropped, we had recognized the backfill of federal one-time funds that helped fill that gap and support those operations as we moved into the recovery years of the pandemic. We're now starting to get to a point where the 3 bars, the 3 primary revenues, are starting to look more proportional. So general fund expenses. Our prior slide categorized the expenses as personnel and materials and services. However, another way to look at our primary operating expenses are provided in our general fund as the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System, or IPEDS categories. So this is where you can see that the 66%, or 2/3 of the general fund, is allocated into instruction, academic support, and student services. The allocation share is consistent with the 24-25 adopted budget, which was also 66%. We have a couple of these other revenue and expense categories to go through. So when we look at special revenue summaries, we broke these out by student paid course fees and general fees. So the blue bar, or the blue box, represents those dedicated course fees that come in for supporting instructional course operations in our classrooms. And the gray box reflects the allocation of the general fees into the dedicated funds for management throughout the fiscal year. So it's a dedicated resource comes in for an expected expense from our students. We also have externally restricted funds. And so our externally restricted include our primary student financial aid and external grants. That is it's more than 75, almost 80% of this pie chart. The reserve funds represent a legal category of Oregon state budget law for reserves where you have an intended purpose for future expense management. And that's where you can see our reserve funds for retirement, insurance reserves, PERS reserves, and a technology implementation reserve. The last bar chart does highlight the impact of the capital funds in this proposed budget. As you can see from prior fiscal years, the capital restricted and capital unrestricted budgets were significantly smaller. Unrestricted budgets refer to the category that doesn't have like that very direct tie with our voter approved language for a dedicated purpose. But they are still set aside and intended to be used for capital projects and capital equipment replacement. If there are no questions on this section, or I guess I can just roll right to Jeff. Looks like Jeff's ready to go. So I'm going to turn it over to Vice President and Chief Financial Officer Jeff Schaefer to walk us through the forecast.
All right. Thank you, Christy. All right. So what's the state of community colleges and education right now in the budget? For any of us that have a smartphone, you may have seen some of these. Your smartphone tends to know when you have an interest in education, and budgets, which you all do because you're here. And so I took a snip of some of these just to put them all in one-stop shopping so you could actually see we are not alone in this right now. The forecast is showing that we're not the only school dealing with $1 million reductions. So you can see we have PCC, Lynn Benton, Chemeketa, Mount Hood, and Lane are either currently doing reductions or have in the last 2 years. So that's snippets that I showed. I also noted the PSU at the bottom down there. So it's not just community colleges. It's happening across a lot of higher ed. And actually, we're actually seeing a lot of budget committees happening right now. So a lot of more of these are coming out. I think I saw Portland Public Schools came out a couple of weeks ago that they're cutting $40 million and 240 positions. I think I saw Reynolds School District last week come out that they're cutting 25 million and laying off 118 teachers. So it's just to show that this is not unique right now. And I wanted to, not for shock effect, but more just to lay of the land of the forecast. This is kind of happening out there and we're not unique in this spot. So why is everybody having these issues? I thought I would dig into it just a little bit with one slide here. This is kind of a one-stop shopping PERS slide. And really, it's one of the single largest cost drivers that a lot of the districts and public agencies are dealing with right now. We have seen 4% increases across all public agencies, and CCC alone is at 6%. So 4% is that average across all those different public agencies and school districts across the state. We're at 6%. And if you think about 6% on $40 million in payroll, that's over $2 million. So we're talking, that's a big impact for something that's just a PERS increasing our rates that we're paying for that pension fund. So that's a large impact that we're seeing right now. I was actually curious myself as to why was CCC 6%? I know a lot about PERS. I've been doing this for quite a while and I thought I knew what cost. So I had a feeling what was causing it, but I went down and actually met with a PERS expert and said, can you explain to me why CCC is at 6% and why a lot of these other districts are at 4%? And that's really the real one-stop shopping answer is on that lower left corner. And that lower left corner, what you see is when they came to me and said, well, what you see, Jeff, is that PERS assumes that you're going to pay your staff about 3.4% annually as a COLA. That 3.4 adds up to about 14.3% over the 4-year cumulative that you see on that chart. And the linkage there is that they actually calculate your pension benefits based on the last 3 years of your annual salary. So they take all the employees that you have at your organization, and then they say, when will everybody hit their 30-year marks? And they figure 3.4% per year going forward until everybody's at 30 years. So it's a math deal. And then they say, but if you give your employees 21%, everybody's going to be making more money in their final 3 years because you raised their base. So you literally raised everybody's rates by more than that base. So now we need to calculate that and we need to raise your rates so you have more pension funds into your pension bonds down the road when all those folks retire. So that's really what that gets to, and it's kind of simple, but you really, once you have to kind of see it and dig into it to really understand where that extra percent comes from. So I did want to note that just because it was kind of an interesting piece. I did break out the costs on the left, and I wasn't meaning to call out any groups, but I did want to at least highlight that the associate faculty on the left, while they are the highest increases at 26% over those 4 years, that was done intentionally. We partnered with administration, partnered with our associate faculty during last bargaining to help deal with something that's happening actually right now in Salem in a bill called about part-time faculty getting the same cost as pay parity as full-time faculty. So I think Clackamas took a little bit of a spearhead in that and worked with the associate faculty here to add an extra 2% annually over 4 years to help get them up to that pay parity. So we are one of the trailblazers in that bill, working towards that pay parity where the other 16 are still working towards that. So I did want to acknowledge that piece. And even while administration was the lowest increases here. We still made a commitment to keep our own administrators up to the market at COLA. So that 16.99 is still right at the CPI rate, which is still over that 14%. So when inflation is higher than what PERS expects and we pay our employees that, that's what happens. And really what that impacts us is instead of being able to break even in classes with 15-ish students, we now need 20-ish students in a class just to break even. So those are the types of impacts that we see from something that's a pure cost impact just to the college for personnel. And so the expense forecast, getting kind of into the pieces of the forecast here, there are cost pressures associated with positions. We just talked about a lot of this. When you increase base wages, those move forward during times of high inflation. If you make that commitment to keep your employees at or above that inflation known as COLA, that puts pressure on that structural deficit, especially if your revenues aren't at pace with that same inflation rate. So that's a piece that's out there. And obviously, as we just noted, the most acute is that PERS rate. If the PERS, if we're compounding that, those COLA rates on top of PERS impacts, those are really impacting our expense pressures and really causing us to have to balance that budget. So we either need to cut expenses or get more revenues to balance. On the revenue side, very little has actually changed from the fall forecast. We've had enrollment has been a little bit up from where we originally projected. We did project enrollment would be up about 5%. It's closer to 9%. So we're actually doing a little bit better in enrollment than we'd projected, but we're still not up to that sweet spot that we talked about last year, where 6,500 FTE to 7,000 student FTE has really been that sweet spot that we usually sit between over the last 20 or 30 years. So that's outside of the Great Recession and the pandemic. That's been our sweet spot here at the college. So we haven't gotten back to that spot. And as President Cook mentioned, state funding is very unclear with what's going to happen, especially with the news today. And the federal funding is causing a lot of uncertainty and a lot of people to hold back funds. So we're not really sure where those revenues will be from the state. And then property taxes and tuition increases have been keeping pace with inflation. But again, that assumes as we increase it, that property taxes and tuition will be able to keep pace with inflation, which so far has remained below 3 to 4%, but you never know in the environment what inflation will actually do over the next couple of years. And then here's enrollment. We always want to talk about our enrollment. You kind of see where coming out of the Great Recession there, 2016, 17, we were at that spot around 7,000 student FTE. COVID and the pandemic was the dip down into the 4,000s. We've slowly been climbing back out. You see that adopted budget 24-25 is right where we're about at with that 5790. We're hopeful that by next year, if we continue at this pace, we could break that 6,000 FTE barrier, which would be a nice spot. We'd be getting closer. And by the end of the biennium, we would hope that maybe we could even get closer to that 6,500 mark. So that's kind of the optimistic hope of where we could be if we stay on the same trend that we've had for the last couple of years. All right, so this is a slide I was trying to decide how I could visualize the structural deficit that happened in the pandemic, because it's a little of an interesting story. We were getting a lot of one-time funds from the feds, but at the meanwhile, you can see in the gray bars where you see the left are the revenues, the right are the expense. The gray bars where they're lower than the right, on the left from the right, is where we're actually creating a structural deficit. So we're receiving less operating revenues year over year than we were spending in funds. That little 3 million light gray bar was because we took furloughs and we took a lot of during COVID, in the quarantine. We also had our buildings were all shut down for about 3 months. So we had an artificial $3 million savings. So I brought that bar back up to where it would have been had we not had that quarantine in 2020. So really you're seeing a structural deficit where the gray bars are shorter on the left than on the right. But the red bars are the one-time funds. So what's really happening is you're actually getting more revenues because of the federal funds than you were while you were having a structural deficit. So this is a bit interesting in that it really is just showing that we were building reserves during the pandemic while we were actually in a structural deficit with less operating revenues than expense. And another way we were showing that here is the left was pre-pandemic on our one-time reserves here, and this is the ending fund balance for our general fund. And what you see is the blue bars are where we were getting down close to, right before the pandemic, we were getting close to that dotted line, which is our board required minimum ending fund balance. And I should mention that the minimum ending fund balance isn't like it's nice to be there. It's like the line in the pool that says if you don't know how to swim, you shouldn't go past that line. If you go past that line, you're probably something bad's going to happen to you. So, so that's really the minimum fund. You always want to keep your bars above that. There's some national practices happening right now that say you should be closer to about 17% just for planning for disaster management and things like that. So they actually say you should be closer to that $12 million area, but the dotted line is more of like the please do never get your bars below that line. And you see we were getting close right before the pandemic. But then we got the one-time funds from the pandemic, so from the federal funds. So those gray bars are the going through the pandemic. We had really good reserves because we had a lot of one-time funds coming in. And now you're seeing on the right-hand side is really the red bars are where we're running out of those one-time funds. They're coming to an end. We have a structural deficit. So you can see the $3 million going from 12 to 9 to 6. And so if we don't do something, we can't live off reserves anymore. There's no more one-time money to live off of. If we don't do something, we will be below that line by the end of the biennium. So that's really what this is, the story that this is trying to tell. And then the actual forecast, the numbers chart, you see the middle bar is really the current revised forecast that we're in right now. That 1.5 is actually that good enrollment, getting that extra enrollment. We were in a pretty good spot structurally. We're only 1.5 away from revenues and expenses this year with that extra enrollment. And then it goes back to 2.87 and 3.015. That's next biennium based on the current projection of the state funding. And of course, that's that PERS impact that I just talked about a while ago. When that PERS goes up and you don't have enough revenues to tie back and balance to those PERS impacts, you end up going from where we were starting to get enrollment to get it a little bit closer. And now we're back to about 3. So this is the structural deficit that we were kind of at last fall, and we're right back to 3.0 for next year, next biennium. And so that's what we did a budget process too, Rob.
Are other colleges not keeping up with COLA? Or did that come around because of when we were negotiating our contracts?
I would have to get back to you on the specifics. I would say we, based on what I've heard from my peers, we have some of the highest wages in the like kind of job classifications across all 17 colleges, which just intuitively tells me when you have the highest and you compare to 16 other colleges and your highest person doing this job or your person doing this job at CCC is higher than the other 16, that tells me we were keeping pace with COLA, with inflation, and other schools weren't. So because they're staying under market, we were staying at the inflation rate. So that intuitively tells me that we were, and other schools probably were not as much. All right, so $3 million deficit is the forecast. Going a little bit here to the process that we used for building this. President Cook hit on this quite a bit about the process we went through, so I won't dig too much into this, but I do want to note that it's built on that existing governor's proposed budget that we had from December. So right now we are at least at that. We aren't hoping for more, and so we're sticking with that current service level that we got back then. Any new information that comes out of that state funding could impact the fall. So we may have a different forecast in fall based on where we land. And then note that we focused on getting to that $3 million target while being centered core to mission. And a lot of this President Cook already mentioned. We didn't want to go through some of those non-strategic reductions of furloughs and across the board reductions. We wanted to stay core to our mission. What are we doing that we could do better and still save money? So that was really the process that we had in front of us. And then this is to kind of also just put us in timing for the state college support funding. You'll see here that we're in those May 24th and, May 14th, 21st board meeting or budget committee and board meetings. And then we end up somewhere probably around the end of May finding out our state funding. So it is interesting that we do this whole process. We get close to approving a budget, and then we find out our state funding, and then we end up right after that having to adopt a budget. So hopefully by the time we get to June, we'll know what that state funding level is, and we can react accordingly. Slide is really to just show the level of involvement in our budget process. For any of those who are involved in other budget committees or other budget processes, you may note there's sometimes not a lot of involvement across your whole entire college community in your budget process. We try to involve and engage in a lot of different areas around our community here. Your role is that pink roll off to the right, the board and budget committee. You start off with policy guidance. We heard we want to work on the structural deficit. That's policy guidance for us. We got our board gave us budget policy, budget guidance, guiding policies. We use those policies to help guide us through our process. We work with our administrators to develop those budget proposals. We then have a budget advisory subgroup made up of folks from across the college that give us feedback. We have a finance council who was there giving us feedback, and it all feeds back to the final decisions to the president and of course to our budget committee and to our board to adopt this budget. So that's the involvement we have in the process. And then what you see with that timeline is we do the forecast, and we started our shared governance with our oversight group, just determining how we were going to engage this year in this process back in fall. In winter, we actually started recruiting. This year, we got a little bit late into our shared governance process because we started a new shared governance process this year. But we were able to recruit and get a budget advisory subgroup together by winter term who came in and started doing, getting ready and getting up to speed, getting their, which we'll go into in a second. We also started assessing reductions with all of our leadership and our deans around the college. And then by spring term, we came in and we started developing those or bringing those reductions to our budget advisory subgroup and getting recommendations and feedback back to our executive team. And the president was able to take all those pieces of feedback and then come up with this proposed budget that you see today. And just quick hit on our budget advisory subgroup. It's made up of about 20 employees. They represent all the different employee groups almost equally, of full-time faculty, associate faculty, classified and administrative staff. They're really there to provide insights to the impacts of all these different budget proposals back to the executive team, their advisory. They really are there to provide voice of others who may not be in the room. And they try to do they really keep the student experience, perspective on our budget reductions or their own perspectives that they bring from faculty or from classified to these budget proposals. And they really help provide a lot of that feedback back to the executive team on these budget proposals. So that's our budget advisory subgroup, and here's their process. They had an orientation. They were provided all the write-ups of all the budget proposals, all the impacts. They actually met with our subject matter experts. So when a particular dean or director came up with a proposal, that person came into one of our breakout sessions to talk about that particular budget proposal, explain it to them, walk them through the data that we provided, and then they provided input recommendations back based on all those meetings. And then they also help prioritize our unit plan requests. So we do, even in the midst of budget reductions, we sometimes have priorities here at the college where we say we're losing a grant and we need to think about what we're going to do. There's things like that that happen that we need to reprioritize and decide, hey, if we got more state funding, where would the next dollar go? We need to start prioritizing potential new funds if they came. So they do a lot of that work with us as well. All right, and with that, I'll get us started in a list of reductions. Reality of reductions. We know they affect people and programs. They affect our morale. They do not have to be permanent. If more funds come, we can always revisit those decisions. So we base our thinking along these lines of, that we will still plan as continued, and knowing that the state funding could be different, we will just go ahead with what we know and we'll focus on these with the uncertainties that we have out there right now. All right, and some key pieces that we had to this. How could we achieve these savings? We incorporated decisions that would get to that towards that $3 million deficit that we were working towards. We got a bunch of proposals, and with these, we will give you some of those impacts and share a little bit of those, the dollars that we think we're going to save and the timeline to implement those reductions. So with that, I got the themes that came out of the process, and then I'll get into the budget reductions. So one of the things that wanted to note was we did have a few themes that came out of our reduction process. One was that we really wanted to focus on minimizing impacts to our full-time employees. Another thing that came out was that we wanted to focus on making courses more efficient, and that they were leading to certificates and degrees. For those who don't know, I know some are familiar with this, but we actually have changed the state funding formula last year. And it used to be based just purely on enrollment, and now it's been shifting and is getting phased in as a greater portion of each year of state funding will be focusing more on things like outcomes for students and gateway courses and moving students along in our process. So we have to be cognizant of state funding too is not just about enrollment anymore. It's about outcomes and students getting to certificates and degrees as well. And then we have to remember that our review our general fund subsidy is happening in some of our program areas that traditionally would be self-sustaining. So when we talk about that, that would be something that maybe isn't in the center of bullseye, but it's a really close to our mission, but maybe a little bit outside, or an enterprise, and where some of these things usually would be self-sustaining programs. But are we subsidizing them because they were really good things to do and we had more money? We used to fund them with a little bit of general fund. So those were really the themes that came out of this year's budget proposals. And I'll go through the list. They're in your packet too. The first one was we went through all of our vacant positions that we had here at the college, or recent retirees. And we focused on going through those and where we could maybe have a minimal impacts or less impacts than other positions. And we did identify at least 3 positions, a vacant position in our AFAC and a vacant position in our TAPS and one in our IT department. And so with those 3, we could potentially save up to $340,000. So we chose those because they wouldn't impact operations quite as much as some of the others, and they wouldn't impact an existing employee in a job at this time. But we do recognize the potential for shifting workload to other staff when you do that. And the impacts to morale and other things that you can do when you do that. So we were noticing those, we got that feedback from our budget advisory group, and we're understanding that we were recognizing that. We were eliminating 2 administrative positions. Those 2 are on the left, a recently vacated associate dean of institutional effectiveness and planning, and an asset manager position we had on campus services. Obviously with those, we felt those were probably the least impactful of our administrative positions that we had out there at this point, that we could eliminate. Obviously those have impacts as well. You have reduced strategies or reduced capacity for strategic planning. Obviously with asset management, you may revert back to practices. We were hoping that position was going to design more of a life cycle replacement for best use of replacement cycle. But you may revert back to things like needing to wait until something is broken until you replace it. So It's unfortunate, but you try to find where you can minimize your impacts as much as possible. And we had two faculty positions, and we know, well, we know there will always be impact for these positions. We're trying to minimize those as much as possible through other associate faculty backfilling those sections. The particular departments that were impacted were math and ESOL, or English speakers of other languages. But we also know that our full-time faculty provide critical service beyond just teaching the courses. So this is the smaller programs may rely on fewer full-time faculty or associate faculty. So there's just less capacity for some of these programs. And we know that things like ESOL, we have vulnerable students out there. So we understand there could be impacts that we're monitoring with these reductions. We also had a non-renewal of an Oregon City resource officer contract that we had. We actually have this officer on contract 9 months out of the year here on campus. It hasn't been filled actually since 2019 due to staffing shortages at the Oregon City Police Department. So we haven't had this position on campus for over 5 years now. So we felt that if we were able to make it 5 years, this may be an opportunity for us to save money with fewer impacts because folks were not used to having the service, at least recently. So that's why we selected that one. Scheduling of sections of classes. So in analyzing our last 2 academic years of course offerings related to enrollment, the divisions, academic division and deans went out and worked with their chairs to identify chronically low enrolled course offerings that could potentially be made more efficient. And so this is really an opportunity for them to go and do this. And as President Cook mentioned, it's really 98 course sections out of the 5,000 that we offer. So it really is less than 2% of all of those. So, and the example from the person who wasn't the academic person in the room that I kind of was thinking about this was if you had a Budget Committee 101 course that you were teaching fall, winter, and spring, and it chronically had about 7 students in fall and 7 students in winter and 7 students in spring. Would it make more sense to have that once in spring? You may have 17 students because you may lose a few students that couldn't do that spring elective and they had to go do a different elective that term. But you still might get 17, which is more efficient having it once with 17 students than 3 times repetitively all year long at 7. So again, we understand there are impacts to that. Students may have fewer choices. You're impacting associate faculty, and obviously the person who was teaching that Budget Committee 101 is only teaching it once instead of 3 times a year. So we understand there are impacts that come with that, but it was an opportunity for us to look at all those sections and see where we could be more efficient with the non-core classes that don't lead to a degree or certificate necessarily.
So that was that 7 was a literal line or just an example?
I made that up. Yeah, that was just an example from, because it would be pretty rare that you'd have 7, 7, 7, but it was looking at numbers. It's like that they were all single digits. Many of these were all single digit courses, right? So that's kind of where that came from. We also did a review and somewhat similar to that. This is one we pulled out to bring to you specifically. It's around automotive and auto body courses. We wanted to pull this out because it has a lot of those same components, but the statistics in here are kind of interesting. They had our auto body courses. These are courses that don't lead to certificates or degrees. So I want to make it clear that these are not, these are like an elective version of a course for automotive. So you don't need any of these credits in order to get the degree or certificate. 78% of the students that took it 78% of the students had already taken this course before that are taking it and enrolled in it. Many are using our 65 plus tuition waivers, so they're not even paying the tuition for these courses, so they're getting free tuition to take this. Over the past 5 years, in the auto body, we had 125 students enroll and only 4 got a certificate. And then in our auto services technology, we had 411 students and only 1 earned a certificate. So that just gives you a sense of over the last 5 years, we've had a large number of students taking these classes. Very few of them are getting a certificate or a degree. Many of them are 65 plus, getting the free tuition waivers and doing these more of a community ed type of class, and using it in one of our general fund degree and certificate programs, which is highly subsidized. So, and I think it's important for everybody in this room to understand that some of these CTE programs are highly subsidized programs. So even if you had a full class with 15, 20 students, it's not even paying for itself, because there is multi-million-dollar machines in modern technology of, like in this case, an automotive center. So even when the classes are full, they're highly subsidized. So you really need to be thinking about, are those students in those highly subsidized classes, especially on evening and weekends when we're turning on buildings and they're very expensive for utilities and other expenses on an evening and weekend by itself. Are those students in that class really going towards a certificate or a degree? So that is one of the lenses they were using. And so we're spending a lot of money and a lot of general fund subsidy by having this in a general fund degree and certificate program. So I wanted to do that. Yeah.
Question, how many of those auto body students were able to get employed? I understand that they may not have finished and got their certificate, but maybe they were still able to obtain employment.
Yeah, I think we'd have to get back to you on that. I think anecdotally, again, when most of them are 65 plus, generally speaking, they weren't somebody that was going into the program seeking employment coming out of it, right? So that's where some of the data was enlightening. You see it, but until you really start seeing the numbers, and that's probably why when you have 411 and only 1 earns a certificate, that tells you that they aren't really there to go into that particular course to come out of it with an outcome of a career path. But it's anecdotal. We could always see if there is some of that information that we can pull out of that. Yeah. And then the other thing we talked about was the subsidies of some of our other programs. One we pulled out here was our customized training. It's an enterprise fund. That means it's meant to be running as an enterprise, kind of concurrently with the college on our campus. So these would be programs we were looking, are there ways where we could shorten that gap between the subsidy that we're paying to help support those programs? And in this case, they had a full-time administrative assistant and a part-time staff that they were able to eliminate that they hadn't been using. And then they were able to make some other materials and services cuts, and they're working on rate development to help bridge that gap between what their general fund subsidy is going forward. So that's an example of our general fund subsidy programs. Another one we have is our first year experience. So these are want to think of them as an orientation course when I think of them for our first year students. And we acknowledge this course is important. We have no intention to reduce the number of students taking this course. It was originally designed actually as a fee-based to give free tuition waiver. So you get the credits, you get a tuition waiver, you take it for free, you pay a small fee, and that fee was meant for a staff member to teach it. It's really evolved into, it's being taught by faculty in the general fund. So we're paying for it out of our general fund with faculty, but we're waiving the tuition cost for it. And when we actually talked with our students, many of them are full-time and have financial aid, and many of them weren't even aware that we were waiving it. They actually thought they were paying for it as part of their financial aid. We also want to mention that we are creating help with our foundation. So if there are students who can't afford that tuition cost, we're working and partnering with our foundation on ways where we can provide that funding as like a scholarship towards that, or a waiver towards that, for those students who can't afford it. So, and it's the first year experience courses. And the YMCA drop-in childcare. We want to acknowledge that there is a need for childcare, drop-in childcare. But we currently had a contract with YMCA for drop-in childcare. When we started doing the data on this, it had only been utilized for 10 days, and had actually only been utilized 35 times since November of 2023. So we provide it and we pay for it to be there every day, but it wasn't being utilized a lot. And remember, this isn't like all-day daycare. This is just drop in. I'm going to come in and talk to registration, bring my child and have it drop. And so it wasn't being utilized. So the data really told us that we should probably end that subsidy for that particular program. And tuition waivers is the last on this list. We took a look at our tuition waivers across the college. It's important to note that number there, that this isn't eliminating our tuition waivers. This is going from 10,000 to just under 9,000. So this was really being more strategic in where we give our tuition waivers and how we give our tuition waivers. There are, in arts and sciences, they're reducing a few waivers in business, computer sciences, in TAPS, technology applied sciences, they're removing a few waivers in welding and industrial technology, academic foundations, AFAC, reducing them in in the athletic trainer, math and English. So the key impact here is that we're not changing our athletics waivers for our athletes. We're not reducing our talent-based waivers. This is really being more strategic with some of our other waivers that we were doing. And one other note is that we are, the needs-based waivers are going to now be managed through our coordinated student resource team. So that's a group here on campus that can really see the need-based of a student and provide the waiver. So it's not just at a department level to say, gosh, it looks like you could really use this waiver. Let me give you a waiver for my class. So it's a little bit of a different strategy that we were using to hopefully get this more consistent across campus, and it comes with a bit of savings to do so. And so those are the summary of all those proposals that I went through. $2.35 million of total reductions. And then there's a quick slide on impacts. Wanted to note here on this table that 2 positions for administration is 3.3%. So while it feels like it's a small reduction of 2 positions, it's still 3.3% is the highest impact of the full-time employees groups. Also want to acknowledge that associate faculty, when you look at those enrollment changes, are as high as 4.9% on the dollars that we allocate for full-time faculty as a reduction. Although this is for the 2.35 million that I went through, and we've noticed that the glide path 650,000 that President Cook will go over here in a minute, those likely would hit more of the full-time positions than the associate faculty. So likely that would balance that chart out more when we get to the glide path and start allocating those out too. One other thing I did want to note here, just while I have it on the screen, wanted to acknowledge, because a lot of you maybe been here for a while and been around getting, I've been giving this presentation actually for a while myself. That 60 FTE for admin professionals is a little bit different than it used to be. So I did want to just take a second to clarify, because you may hear at a board meeting or something about administration increases. When 2023, we had a group of employees here that were called confidential employees. They were hourly employees. Because they were hourly employees, we put them in with our classified staff on all of our reporting. So our budget books, our audit reports, they showed something more like 40-ish administrative positions. And those dozen or so confidential employees showed up with our classified staff. In 2023, we determined that they were exempt salaried employees. So we moved them out of that hourly classified group into the exempt administrator group. So we went immediately from a 40-ish something administrators to 60 administrators. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it looks odd for somebody who goes back in a book and looks 3 years back and says, why is this 40 something go to 60 something for administration? It's no change. It's a changing the way we classified a group of employees that were used to be called confidential and are now called administrative professional. So I did want to acknowledge that just for the group in case you hear any more on administration increases that have happened over the past. All right, and then the last slide on impacts here is really just a reminder of when you don't take up across the board reductions, over 71% of our departments will experience no reduction. So it's when you're being strategic on how you do it, almost 3/4 of the college will experience no change in their current service levels or very little downstream. And of those 22 departments, which will see some type of reduction, it amounts to about 3.3% of their operating budgets will be reduced. So just want to say that means 97% of even what they were doing before, they're going to still be doing. So it's not a big dramatic cut to any of our departments necessarily. We try to do our best to minimize the impacts with these reductions. All right, and with that, I think I'll hand it over to President Cook to talk about the glide path.
Thank you. So as mentioned earlier, we still have work to do. So we still have about $650,000 that we have to identify this next year. And we needed the time to make sure that we're doing proper analysis of these strategies that you're going to see ahead of us so that we can reduce impacts where we can. Also, it gives us some more time to really look at our vacant positions, make some changes in that way too. So the first one that we're looking at are what are called our older adult tuition waivers. We actually have a couple different flavors of these tuition waivers. It's been some time since we've reviewed these programs, and we want to spend some time really looking and saying, do we need both of these? Do we want to look at what some of our other colleges are doing and maybe come into some more alignment and some consistency with how this is happening in other places? So, so this gives us some time to really look at this and see where there might be some savings here with these waivers in particular. They're similar to the waivers you saw earlier with a reduction, but obviously a different category that we didn't include in that because we need more time to look at it. There is some potential impact to our perception of CCC that, we're a community college and we want to, be accessible to everybody here in our community, including our older adults. We wouldn't, in this case, eliminate all of these, but we really, I think, need to at least do some analysis of the program. Secondly, we need to continue assessing our administrator positions. So as you saw, there are 2 that we reduced, and there's those 60 positions that was mentioned. We want to spend some more time really looking and seeing are there some other efficiencies that can be gained in administration, and is there some other reductions that possibly could be made? Again, had we done that now, we would have been laying off additional people. And so as we're trying to reduce impact, we need some more time to really do that assessment. And then general fund subsidies. So during this review, we assessed traditional self-sustaining programs, and now I want to reduce the subsidies associated with those programs. So as our current landscape continues to change and we want to be good stewards of those funds, we need to really look at the models for these and really see where we should stop subsidizing or can't afford to subsidize, where we may have done that in the past. So that gives us some chance to really look at that. There's again, some potential impacts there with some dissatisfaction among departments that might have been used to receiving this support. So there might be some hits to morale and collaboration. And then, we really need the time to look and see if our enterprise funds have the sufficient balances to be self-sustaining, because we don't want to unintentionally, eliminate something when we wanted to give it a glide path to actually be successful. Probably one of the larger opportunities in that $650,000 category is business service delivery improvements. So this is about our service delivery. And so we've got a number of what we would describe, I think, kindly as difficult or inefficient processes that slow down and hamper responses to students, employees, and our community partners. Some of these actually, a lot of these are due to technology, some aging technology that really need to examine and potentially invest in. But some of it's just systems that we've had for some time that really need to be reviewed. Our budget advisory support group, has identified that, many of these things have already been identified. We now need to take the time to really implement and make those keys. So IT, and our ITS, structure, or excuse me, our IT and our business office and HR systems are all antiquated. But we still need to pay our bills, pay our people, invest in systems to improve this work. So we anticipate while this, could save us some money, there's going to be potentially some challenges in making these shifts, managing workload, and may have some one-time technology costs too, as we look at ways to get that done. Curriculum sustainability and alignment. We need to continue looking at a few of our programs that have lower enrollment and determine if there's some other further reduction in associated savings that we can make with those. We don't see this being a large scale, like looking at every single program. I think we want to be really focused and look at, some of our programs that may have some opportunity here. But as you know, anytime we look at, reducing or removing a program, there's a lot of community impact and perception that comes along with that. So we want to be thoughtful about how we, go about curriculum sustainability. And so our timeline, just so you know, again, because this has to be done this year to get to our $3 million goal. This summer, we've got the business process group that's going to come together and set the scope to begin this. Fall, when faculty and everybody are back, we'll get the processes and really start looking at this, present our findings, fall forecast, to see what we need to do there, and then determine what the cost savings are for each of these pieces, and frankly, if we need to add any others. And then winter term, actually, we'll look at the findings, make the recommendations, and incorporate the changes so that we can come in by the deadline of this next year. And then a number of people are curious about, what did you consider that you didn't end up doing? What were some of the discussions that didn't come about? Here's a few examples. There were actually a number of things that didn't happen, but I think here are some of the bigger ones. There was a proposal to reduce the number of student computer labs. As we looked at that, there frankly wasn't a whole lot to be gained financially from that, and the impact potentially on students, particularly our vulnerable students who really rely on those labs, was concerning. So we pulled that one off. I think almost every time we've done a budget reduction, the question comes up, can we just contract out custodial services? And you can substitute custodial for a few different functions that we have. So we do that analysis every time, and every time it comes out that we would pay significantly more if we were to do that. So, looking at these central services in our facilities, so taking care of the grounds and taking care of our buildings and the rest, I'll just put in a plug. Our facilities crew does amazing amount of work without a whole lot of money, and that's proven time and time again as we look at contracted services for those. And then we often get this question too, what if we just reduced our athletic programs and cut maybe some of our sports? And it's an interesting one. There's a sort of a rule of thumb with athletics that when you bring in an athlete, they typically bring two of their friends to go to school as well. So actually, when we look at things like athletics, and it actually transfers over to some of the scholarships we give out in music, theater, and others, that FTE generation that's brought in by those student participants and their friends that come with them actually ends up contributing more than it would if you'd reduce that. So we pulled those ones off as well. And I think I think we're actually getting close, we're actually close to the end. That's like, we're getting there. So proposed next step. So, again, hopefully this is, we're going to take questions here in just a second. Hopefully what we've done is, and hopefully you see evidence that we took the guidance seriously that we heard, and that we've brought back a budget and a budget proposal for you all that follows that and addresses our structural deficit and our current resources. We want to also note, we're setting a high bar for new ongoing additions during this last transition year of one-time funds. So we're really, trying to put us in a place of strength as we move forward. And we want to, get our structure and our impact for investments on this cycle so that we work together. And then we want to be ready to build capacity both for our capital projects, our bond projects, and look towards times when our resource growth is feasible without our structural deficit. So that is our presentation. We would love to respond to questions from the Budget Committee. Thank you.
Do you coordinate, well, and you can only do this in the metropolitan area, but do you coordinate with like Mount Hood and Portland community? So for instance, you offer the auto body and you only have 5 students. Well, maybe Mount Hood only has 5 and PCC only has 3. Do you talk about maybe combining or having just one course that would one college would offer?
I can respond to that.
Okay.
So we coordinate quite a bit with our primarily those two, but also Shemeka to the south of us too, about program offerings and the rest. I would say we haven't in the past had, at least at our levels, the deans or department chairs might feel differently, discussions about, I've got spots in my classes, or we're going to cancel this one, and what do you have there? So I don't believe that we're getting down to the level of coordination that you're suggesting by class, so that I'm aware of anyway. It's more about overall program offerings. We try not to duplicate, if there's, unless there's need, right? We all offer nursing is the classic example, and when there's still more of a need for nursing. But if there's a specific program that Mount Hood's offering and there's not enough demand to offer that, we don't compete in that way.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Jamie Damon has a question.
Yeah, thanks. This is Jamie. So first, I just want to say thank you for a thoughtful and strategic approach to the budget cuts. At first I was thinking, how is this going to work, to not do something across the board? But the way that you have taken just a scalpel, if you will, to really being thoughtful and careful about the cuts that you're going to make. I'm really impressed. I do have a question about the admin, our administrative team. And so you said you were going to take a look at that, and we have the 60 positions. How does that compare? How does our admin pool number of positions compare to other community colleges? Do we have the similar amount per faculty? Do we have more? Can you speak to that?
I can. That actually came up as part of our data that we were using when we were doing a lot of data informed. Each of these proposals actually had an entire data dive that went into them. That's that we provided with our budget advisory subgroup. I also wanted to just reset a little bit back to what I talked about earlier when we had 40 some administrators 5 years ago. I used to come and talk about how we were the second leanest administrative group. For anybody who was around back then, we had a graphic. We talked about in those HEC reports that we had the second leanest amount of administrators compared to the student FTE and other full-time positions. With that conversion of those employees over, we also converted a few of our leads over to supervisory positions because they were really supervising. That's kind of what also pushed us up towards 60. We are now the 5th leanest of the 17 colleges. So it's a good question, Jamie. We were acknowledging that too, that even with that, those reduction of 2 would keep us right around the 4th or 5th leanest. If we took another one, I think it would put us on the cusp of the 4th leanest. As far as the 17 colleges, which would still mean there's 12 colleges that are more top-heavy in administrators compared to their other full-time classified and faculty positions and their student FTE. Either way you look at it, we are definitely a lot leaner in our administration here than many of our peer colleges.
Thanks a lot for that answer, Jeff. Appreciate it.
How much is that senior tuition Is it free for 65 plus? How much is it utilized?
That is a good question. I want to say we looked into that and it was 150,000 to 200,000 a year worth of tuition that was waived, but I mean, I know it wasn't like a 500,000 and I know it wasn't 50,000. I believe it was around 150 to 200,000 a year in waived tuition. And that was between the adult senior. So I may be commingling both the 65 plus, which is free, and then we have a gold status, which I think is 62 plus. You can get
62.
50% off, and they're a little bit different. The 65 plus free is really intended to be like an audit a class. I want to come in and I turn 65 and I want to get a computer class. I want to come in and take the weed and pesticide class in our horticulture because I want to learn how to take care of the weeds in my garden. That's a lot more of what those classes were meant to just have somebody come in and audit, meaning there's capacity, they're not at a wait list. There's, it's a class that could have 15 students and only has 12, so it has room for somebody to come in as a senior to take that 13th slot. So that's really what that program is, much more specific, and it just happens in the automotive, it was getting used by half the class, right? So that's the rare example of that. It's not quite as utilized in other places to that extent.
Then the 62 plus is actually for if you wanted to get credit, you could get credit classes for half price.
We do have the full data set that we can provide to the committee after if you'd like, that has disaggregated data and year over year of some of that information, just both the count and the dollars.
I wouldn't mind seeing it. Thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great to see.
Oops. And my question is about the reductions. And I'm thinking of the childcare reduction. And I know that those folk who come early childcare, do they keep their kids in there for the whole day? Or is it just those who drop off early and then they pick them up?
No, we have a Head Start program that's not changing. That's meant to be more of the all-day childcare that we have in our Family Resources Center. This was a YMCA drop-in childcare that we had over here in McLaughlin that was very specific to, I won't know the time off the top of my head, of a certain amount of time or less. Do you know?
Can you come up to the microphone, please?
Hi, all. Danielle Hoffman, Dean of Academic Foundations and Connections. Thank you for the question. The challenge that we saw is there's definitely a need for childcare for our students. This was not meeting their needs, though. So it was something we tried through our strategic enrollment management plan as a way to try and fill the gap. And what we saw is that what our students truly need is consistent, regular, ongoing care. And they needed to find that in order to be engaged in school. And so the drop-in childcare did not fill the gap in the way that we were hoping it would. And so we just really saw it wasn't utilized. And so we're removing that and hoping to continue connecting students with the resources through the Foundation for Childcare Support.
Thanks.
I have a comment and then a question possibly. So my comment is, first of all, thank you for the presentation, and I appreciate a lot of work has to go in to make all this happen behind the scenes as part of this process, right? I do want to say though, however, I caution the use of the word sustainable for this budget. The reality is that there's going to be work ahead of us in the years to come if revenues don't change their trajectory, right? I mean, this is just one, but many to come if that doesn't change somehow in this process, right? Because what's really happening is we continue to erode the reserves and get closer to that faithful line that you mentioned earlier in this process, right? So, but anyway, lots of work goes into it. So kudos to all those involved. But I also want to ask this question just to make sure for a point of clarification. The cuts that are being discussed tonight they're just proposals at this point, right? By any adoption of this budget doesn't approve these cuts necessarily. I would suspect that ultimately, until you don't even know what the state's funding is at this point and where you really have to go at that point, right? I presume also that there's more discussion to be had with the board ultimately on how those cuts and would ultimately hit the institution itself. So I guess that's a question. So the adoption or approval of this budget doesn't authorize these cuts, rather these are proposed options in the future.
Yeah, generally speaking, the process is that we recommend these reductions. This group would approve that recommendation that came from the president. And then the adoption is the vote that really happens that says, these are now going to happen, effective on July 1. Effective July 1 through the end of next year, you need to come up with the glide path and come up with a plan for that remaining amount. So really, nothing is set in stone until that gets done, because we have a budget that's got a $3 million deficit until somebody tells us to make it smaller.
Yeah, my question to the latter was really about the fact that, having just seen this for the first time, and not knowing necessarily the details of the backdrops of where some of these cuts were proposed. My first cut at some of them would not necessarily align, an approval. Right? I'll give you an example. I'd like to know a lot more about why we would reduce tuition waivers for students when there are possibly other things we could take out of the budget, as an example.
Yeah, and that's really what this dialogue is for. And I think we do a lot of work. I've been at other institutions where there's a bunch of proposals that come to a budget committee, and there's discussions with our budget advisory subgroup. A lot of them start off with, well, why would we do waivers? And then it got into, well, let's not do athletic waivers, and let's not do the work-based waivers, and let's not, we can't take away our employee waivers because those are part of a benefit that we provide. But there may be some waivers that we could consider. Maybe we could consider capping waivers at a certain amount, or taking them in more centralized forms of deans issuing those out more equally, so one department isn't using up a lot of extra waivers. So it's more about being good custodians of the waivers that got to the dollar figures, less about we're just eliminating like waivers across the board.
Yeah, I know. I think really my question or my comment really was about, approving the budget versus approving these cuts, essentially, right?
Yeah.
I don't have any problems with, the proposed budget you have, the numbers, they have to make sense to fit within the regards. On the other hand, there are a number of policy decisions and ramifications of these cuts, essentially, right? And I'd like to think that that was really left to ultimately when the budget gets adopted, but there is still room to have discussions about how that would occur, even though this body may have to make a judgment about at least approving a proposed budget to that board, right? But later on, that could be modified or changed accordingly before adoption.
Yeah, and it could always be amended. Again, and that's what we try to tell in that process, that because community college funding could change, as President Cook mentioned, it didn't look very promising, but in prior biennium, we had extra funds that always came in June, which allowed us to have those decisions in that adoption process in June. So, so one could always glass half full hope that we have opportunities like that to even reconsider where there are opportunities like that.
Yeah, and if I can add, I mean, of course, this is the board's decision, the ultimate board's decision. The one caution I would have is the longer that it takes. I mean, we have most of this plan to start July 1. The longer that we take to start these reductions, the harder it will be to get to that 3 million. So, hopefully we can answer your questions in a timely fashion so that we can move forward with the new fiscal year starting in July.
And, please.
Well, I just wanted to, I feel this process has just been incredibly thoughtful and ongoing, and I, as a board member, would not want to be questioning a whole lot of what has happened, because so many people from the institution have been involved in it and know what they're doing. Anyway, that was just an observation. Go ahead.
And sorry, I just want to make sure I'm on the same page. The 2.3 million in cuts, like there's the line items in the budget of, X expense, Y expense, Z expense. Let's just say, there's no further discussion, everything's hunky dory and everything's approved. That includes those 2.3 million of cuts. Is that correct? Okay, got it. And then and then as I recall, there's like a line item for the additional $650,000 that's in that budget. So in a sense, we are like recommending those cuts.
We're proposing a budget with a $3 million
Yeah,
reduction.
okay,
Mhm.
got it. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was on the same page with that. I have a couple more. Oh, sorry, please.
I thought we were ready for a motion. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I have a couple more questions. And so just to make sure, to board member Wheeler's comment about the automotive area, we mentioned it was like 60% used by, or I forget the exact number, by people 65 and upper. I'm probably mixing those number. The majority was. On the bullet point, I saw high school was one of the negative impacts. Is that kind of the other?
Well, of those five, they weren't all five. Yeah, and if Armetta wants to speak to that, yeah.
Please, thank you.
Is the dean over that program.
Good evening. My name is Armetta Burney. I'm the Dean of the Technology Applied Science and Public Services Division. So the proposal includes a total of 5 classes, 2 from the auto body program and 3 from the automotive service program. And so the 2 auto body courses are generally utilized by those who are no longer working primarily. They're students that are not pursuing a program. They are taking these courses and have taken them repeatedly for many years. And the other 3 courses, some of those students take those courses over and over again. And we do have one course that is articulated to one of our high schools. The challenge, though, is that none of these courses are aligned to a certificate or degree program. So those students that are taking that course that's articulated, if they decide to pursue the auto body program or automotive program once they transition here, those credits don't count towards their degree. So it's a mix. With the auto body courses, those are primarily our older population of students that are not looking to pursue a degree or certificate. The other courses in the automotive program is a mix of students. Some are high school students, some are not.
Thank you.
Sure, yes.
And I have a question on that too. What would the number, 400, was that just over the number?
That was over 5
Over
years.
5 years, okay. And many of those are the same people.
Yes, yes. Many of those students take the classes over and over again. And very few students transition to our degree or certificate programs for all 5 of those courses.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And then additional question I had, and I recall from last year's budget meeting, I remember hearing about the rising utility rates for PG&E, and I feel like there was something about like we're like one of the larger users of PG&E in maybe the area or in the state or something like that. But I noticed on the budget that maybe I'm mistaken, I don't remember seeing a big jump in utilities. Because I know PG&E rates went way up this last year. Do we feel that we're covered on that end?
Yeah, I think we budgeted a 10% increase for utilities. So they should be there. They may have gotten buried amongst other bigger numbers that are sometimes in a book like that. I will say one thing that's very fortunate about our bond program is we had a specific $7 million line item for energy efficiency.
That's right. Okay.
That we have in there. We're also a lot of major maintenance projects. You don't even have to target it towards energy efficiency. You just become more energy efficient when you are replacing a roof, that's not the roof's not meant to be energy efficient project, but, because it's not getting ETO rebates or anything, but it actually holds in the energy. We have a higher R value coming in on this roof.
Sure.
That we're working on the community center right now. So those are the types of things where we're hopeful that, we're not budgeting for that. We're actually not counting for that. We're hopeful to actually, because of course the projects aren't even going to be built probably for another year. But we're hopeful that once those things are actually built and in place, that we will actually start seeing those offsets happen between the rate increases and our savings that we're seeing by having an air handler that today is a chiller and a boiler, serving 7 buildings at once.
Yeah.
Will now be individual customized units hitting classrooms individually that are being used. So
Awesome. Okay.
that's what we're hopeful will come out of that.
Thank you. That actually reminds me of my dad always told me you can tell if a roof is good or not if you look at it in a snowstorm and if the snow is melted or not. So I'll report back if when it snows, if there's now with the new roofs. That's great.
One other thing on utilities, in the appendix slide, I did break out some of like the greatest hits of materials and services. So that's where you can see the top 10 expense categories of those departments with expenses. 71% of those high dollars, utilities is our highest department materials and service expense. It's 2.1 million. 10% increase on 2.1 million is about $200,000. So that's where we're seeing that come in as net. As soon as you start to get down to some of the smaller dollar items, they're pretty much, it's right about there. Yep. So that first top 4 of those top 10 departments are utilities, fixed IT costs, insurance premiums, and write-offs for bad debt as those primary large categories. As soon as you move away from that, the materials and services budgets for departments, it drops off very quickly for what goes into instructional size. And there's some pros and cons, as we've talked about, with across the board or a soup thin salami model. I like salami. That's a nice way to characterize that. But what you end up seeing is you see an erosion of those base materials and services happening year over year, and you start getting to these very small materials and services and just reduced flexibility to react to something breaking, to inflationary cost pressures, because that resource can go really fast in a department.
Thank you. And my one last question, hopefully, is going back to the ESL, the English Second Language courses. You mentioned that the staff will backfill. I just want to clarify that we're not expecting a reduction in like offering or number of students taking the courses with that.
No, in fact, those programs continue to increase.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
even with all of the federal uncertainty, we're actually pleasantly surprised that there's still healthy enrollments in there. So we're trying to figure out now, and Danielle may have more information here that she wants to share, how we can support them with associate faculty and with other pieces. So yeah, Danielle, if there's anything you want to add.
Sure. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
It's definitely an area that we're watching and hoping to support as best as we can. One of the things that we have also done for this department over the last year, as they've had the significant increase in their enrollment, is that we have increased their funding through alternative budgets for more just-in-time support. And one of the things that we were actually able to do, even through this budget cut process, is we reallocated $1 million to our academic departments in all divisions at the college. And so I'm working with the ESOL department right now and determining how much of that within our division will be allocated to them. So they're getting an increase in $200,000 in their associate faculty budget, even while we've made cuts and done these other things. So we are investing in that department and in those students, even while we're navigating this. And I would hope that we could advocate to get that full-time position back in a future year. But we are still investing in those needed areas while we're working through this budget cut process.
Awesome. Thank you.
And if it's helpful, Wade, if you have any follow-up questions around the waivers, I could speak to some of that as well. Did you want me?
No, I'll wait.
Okay.
Appreciate it though.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
It's my understanding, right? We're not going to move to adopt anything tonight, right? This is just informational purposes only, correct? All right. I
Correct.
have time to ask.
I also just want to say, we talked about auditing some of the classes. I think way back in the day, my mom taught at Mountain Hood Community College for a while, and I'm pretty sure, and she taught English as a second language. I'm pretty sure I was one of the kids that was auditing those classes for free when when I was a kid. I wanted to say just one more, just personal thing on this as a thank you to the staff and everyone that was involved in this budget process, because cutting funds is always hard and there's so many areas that need it. I want to say from a personal experience, again, my mom taught at Mountain Hood Community College. My wife is a public school teacher, and to be able to say that you've kept up with inflation is amazing. That's really cool, and I think that's going to have a lot of long-term impacts on retention of staff as well as just overall product, because people want to go where they're being paid properly, and we all know teaching is a profession that sometimes the wages don't quite match up with other professions. So I just want to say thank you guys for supporting those kind of people, because again, that was how I was supported as a kid, and I admire that a lot. Thank you.
But if there were, I was just going to say next steps, next week you will have the opportunity to vote and approve or, and ask any questions you want to do. There will be a public process where people can give public input and then continue discussion. So if there are questions from anyone, please, direct those to Katie so we can get those responses back to all of the budget committee members. And that's helpful for us so we can do the research and make sure you have that. But then you also have the ability on next Wednesday night to ask any questions as well.
And any further comments or questions?
I just have one, just that about the 600,000 that is coming down the pike too, that I know we don't want to be laying off anyone, but I'm really interested in being kept apprised of what is going on with that.
I would expect nothing less. Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Yeah.
If we are going to have an indication as to the priorities, I think I heard you said in the appendix, or there is a priority. Like when you start reductions, that you have a list that you would like to see, and those that, yeah, okay. Is there something somewhere that we can take a look at that?
And when we were talking about the prioritization was more about if we were to start adding back. What we really didn't do, we have done this in prior years, we did not do this with this particular list of budget reductions. In the past, we've had proposals where we have prioritized and said, like, if we were to buy the first one back, which one would it be? We didn't get to that level with this group. We were actually, to be honest, we just didn't have a lot of time with our budget advisory subgroup. It was everything we could do to get to them up to speed, get the proposals to them, have the subject matter experts walk them through, show them all the data, explain all the data, and get recommendations back to us just in time for this meeting. Because of the shared governance process was so delayed in getting started, with this being the first year of our shared governance process, our new shared governance process. So I would say in a normal or a traditional year, we would start earlier, and part of that process is to have more of a prioritization tiering. We tend to do more of a tiering, like this is the group that we would probably we would definitely most support moving through. This group we didn't feel very good about, so if we had more money, we would probably want to consider those. And then there's some that usually they just say we don't support some of these. So we tend to do more of tiering like that in that group.
You've done an excellent job getting this to us at this time. So I was just thinking in my bedtime when I wanted to try to read and understand something, coming back to the meeting next week to have it clear in my head.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
I appreciate Joe.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone for attending. If there's no further business, the Clackamas Community College budget meeting is adjourned and will reconvene at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, May 21st, 2025. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
Speaking is
6 p.m.
speaking is hard.
Have to have